Hello to anyone who is watching this after the fact. Happy August. It's so good to know that you are following along. And let us begin with prayer. This is the prayer I used past Sunday. It's from the New Zealand prayer book, the collect for the 9th Sunday after the Feast of Pentecost. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I was going to use that prayer and I wound up swapping it out. Disregard what I just said. This is another prayer from the New Zealand prayer book. Let us pray. Holy and eternal God, your Son, Jesus Christ, has taught us to learn from the simple trust of children. Give us pure hearts and steadfast faith to worship you in spirit and in truth. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Oh, just a bit of housekeeping before we get going. I am going to be away. Marietta said I'm away a lot. It feels like I've been away a lot, and I don't mean to be, but I'm spreading my vacation over several different periods this summer. So my second week of vacation is next week, August 9th, and then I'm taking another week, the week of the 21st of August. So I'm wondering if it would be less confusing just to go on hiatus for the rest of August and pick up the first Wednesday of September. What do you all think about that? And I'm also happy to meet on the 16th and the 30th, if that's not going to confuse everybody.
What?
Any votes one way or the other?
Uh,
There you go. Does anyone have an opinion?
Yeah, I take a break. I mean, it's just me, but I'm out for those dates in any case.
I just think a lot of us are in and out during August, so maybe that would make sense. Is that okay with everybody else?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
not a bad idea, Patty.
That makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll meet today and then we'll pick up whatever that first Wednesday in September is. And I'll send a reminder note out.
Okay.
What about, I've just got my calendar out, the 30th of August is also a Wednesday.
That would be fine if we want to pick up then. Do we want to resume August 30th?
We'll be traveling, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I'm out then too. So
I mean, I can, I can connect from pretty much anywhere. It's just if we're not traveling that day, then it's not a problem. So I'm open.
Any other votes?
I'm open. Whatever you guys prefer, we could do after Labor Day, which I guess is September 6th or what, I don't know.
I can't believe we're talking about Labor Day already.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm fine either way. If people like to check in and want to do the 30th, then that works too. So.
All right, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we say we won't meet through the 23rd and then we'll regroup and see who's around for the 30th. And if there aren't very many people and if we want to wait until September, we can do that. I'm really flexible.
Okay.
I get back.
Okay, sounds good.
That works.
Okay. We have once I get back from that trip at the end of August, I'm here. So, okay. Before we move forward in Matthew 17, I just wanted to revisit that quote that I shared with you, excuse me, at the very end of last week's session. Last week, we had just a fabulous conversation looking at the art and thinking about the embodiment of Jesus and why that is so important, specifically when we were talking about the story of the Transfiguration, which of course you all will hear in church this coming Sunday. But for whatever reason, and I don't know why, the lectionary has you hearing the Luke version this week, even though we're in the Matthew year. So it'll be interesting. And John prepped us for this last week with the gospel parallels. So you can be listening for the differences. And by the way, for everyone who was at our ad hoc service on Sunday, the Bible study group represented beautifully in our conversational homily about the kingdom of God. That was really fun. Thank you for that. Anyway, going back to the question of that this commentary presents. Ronald Allen says, our encounter with Jesus should leave the church a transfigured community. present in the old age, but shining with the light of the new. And I wondered how you heard that, if that resonated with anybody. And then I have a follow-up question for us after that. What does it mean, first of all? Our encounter with Jesus should leave the church a transfigured community. So the commentator is really bringing the story into our time, the challenge for us. Present in the old age, but shining with the light of the new. Any thoughts?
I'm not sure what present in the old age is supposed to mean. I guess maybe standing, not dismissing the earlier beliefs that all the foundations, and then illuminated with the whole new developments, the epiphany of the transfiguration turns a light on.
I like that. Anyway,
I guess I see it as the church is never finished. In other words, the church we are here in the old age, but we are moving towards a new age as well.
that's how I hear it too, John, that this is the old age, right? The already, but not yet, that Jesus has entered into human experience. The kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God has broken in, but is not yet complete. So, and St. Paul talks about how the present time is fading away, right? And so we're moving toward that new age. But I use air quotes because new age has a connotation. But
I guess I have maybe I have like a more literal interpretation, but I guess what I'm thinking when it says present in the old age and shining with the light of the new means more to me that like in the old age there was healing, there was tangible Jesus. And today we have like the light of Jesus and sort of that rumination of what's here now. What we have is faith and light, but we don't have that presence in the physical sense.
Oh, that's interesting, Kim. I like that take.
But I might be looking at it too literally. So,
and I don't know what Ronald Allen was getting at so I think that it's kind of open for us to receive. My question is, what does it mean for the church to be a transfigured community? Focusing on the first half of that sentence, which might be a little bit easier than trying to parse the second. What does it mean for us to be a transfigured community? Ah, great response.
That's a tough one. I mean, I read the transfigured in that first part in light of the second part, and it recalled to me that in the transfiguration, Moses and Elijah were there, and the transfiguration wasn't just Jesus glowing with light, but also the presence of the traditional Old Testament prophets. And so transfiguration in this sense means the presence of the tradition as something that's real and relevant and important as we go forth into the future.
Lovely. Lovely. So the onus is on the church to embody, teach, keep alive that tradition as we move forward. That's what I hear you saying.
Yeah.
Cool. Anything else?
The skies have not opened up above me or I believe St. Dunstan saying that God is well pleased with us.
Well, God didn't say God was well pleased with the disciples and everyone who was observing that moment. The voice said that God was well pleased with Jesus.
With Jesus, yes.
So, but
we are supposed to be the transfigured community.
Well, what does that? But I'm still wondering what that means.
So am I.
Okay.
That's the problem, is that the transfiguration was God speaking.
Well,
it really was not Moses and Elijah coming down. It was not, the clothes being white as snow, those were all special effects.
The transfigured means that there's a change in the appearance. So that had to do with Jesus.
Well,
So
maybe we're enlightened. Maybe we're enlightened as a community and in a phase of constant betterment as we, I don't know, band together to try and deepen our faith.
okay.
And as we continue to realize that our foundation is the old age,
Mhm.
the traditions, the learning, all the years and millennia of prophets and whatever. Be present with them, include them, but recognize that this new light is illuminating all of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you remember the Greek word for transfigured that we looked at last week?
Metamorphosis.
Metamorphosis.
Yeah, yeah. So what does it mean to be a metamorphosized, if that's the word, community? What does it mean to be a community of metamorphosis? Maybe that's a better way to phrase the question.
Well, caterpillars metamorphize, and they are the same organism, just in a different shape.
Okay. And
In a
so,
more beautiful shape.
Yes. Well,
So there's something here, I think, and I keep putting pressure on this because I don't want us to slip away or to not focus on the fact that we talked last week about what the purpose of the transfiguration was. And Mark offered that wonderful gloss on it about being for Jesus's sake. And we also talked about it being for the sake of the disciples, because it comes right after that really difficult conversation at Caesarea Philippi when Jesus tells everybody that he is going to suffer and be put to death. And then he's going to be resurrected, but they don't focus on that. Peter in particular focuses on the suffering. And so this comes 6 days after that, as Matthew tells us, is not insignificant, right? That there's, this preview of coming attractions. And so as people who have, we are obviously post-resurrection Christians, right? We're Christians who are a resurrection people. That's what it is to be the church. And so what does it mean then to have had this, to Ellie's point, this epiphany, this aha, this revelation? And are we living as though we've had that revelation? Do we have an understanding of who God is? And does that change? Are we a community of metamorphosis? These are great questions that we're not going to answer now, but I want to deposit them in the backs of our minds as we move forward. And then the next question I have, it's a two-parter. Are the disciples a transfigured community? And I don't want us to answer this right now. That's the guiding question that I want us to consider as we move forward in Matthew 17 today. Because again, Matthew 16, Caesarea Philippi, really difficult conversation. First 13 or so verses of Matthew 17, transfiguration, and trying to figure that out, and John the Baptist and all that. So the disciples, or at least the inner core, or the inner circle rather, Peter and James and John, the closest ones, are wrestling with this. And so I'd love for us to think about whether the disciples are a transfigured community as we move forward.
They've got a lot to process anyway.
They've got a lot to process. That. Amen. Can you imagine? And, the Gospels don't tell us that they went off and, had some time to talk together. There's no reflection period built into the story. So it feels like they are figuring it out on the fly. They're building the plane as they're flying it. So, yeah, really interesting. Okay. So I'm just going to reread this chapter that we read last week, because verse 14 is at least ostensibly meant to be a segue from there, but sometimes I wonder about the editing of Matthew. As they were coming down the mountain, they being Jesus and Peter and James and John, Jesus ordered them, tell no one about the vision that you've just seen until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. And the disciples asked him, why then do the scribes say that Elijah must come first? And we debated about this a lot last week. He replied, Elijah is indeed coming. Sorry, Joey has. Oh dear. Sorry. The gardeners are here. I'll be right back. I'm going to put him in the other room.
But the scribes do always say that Elijah must come first, right? All the older readings.
Here I am. Sorry about that. All right. So Elijah is indeed coming and will restore all things. But I tell you that Elijah has already come and they did not recognize him, but they did to him whatever they pleased. So also the Son of Man is about to suffer at their hands. And so once again, Jesus talks about his suffering. Then the disciples understood that he was speaking to them about John the Baptist. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. All right, so that's where we left off last week. And then here is where we're going. Would somebody like to read 14 to 23 for us?
Oh, sure.
Thanks, Fred.
Okay. When they came to the crowd, a man approached Jesus and knelt before him. Lord, have mercy on my son, he said. He has seizures and is suffering greatly. He often falls into the fire or into the water. I brought him to your disciples, but they could not heal it. You are an unbelieving and perverse generation, Jesus replied. How long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy here to me. Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of the boy, and he was healed at that moment. Then the disciples came to Jesus in private and asked, why couldn't we drive it out? He replied, because you have so little faith. Truly I tell you, if you have the faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. When they came together in Galilee, he said to them, the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. They will kill him, and on the third day he will be raised to life. And the disciples were filled with grief.
Thank you, Fred. So this is one of those editorial moments. You know, we talk a lot about how the Gospels came to be, and I see it in Matthew a lot. These, you know, these gaps or these editorial scenes that are showing, you know, that just don't, it doesn't flow as well as it might. So they come down from the mountain, and then it says when they came to the crowd. So we don't know anything about this crowd, right? There's just sort of an assumption that the crowd is waiting for them. What do you hear in this story, in this excerpt? What do you notice?
But what jumps out at me is that odd outburst from Jesus, you faithless and perverse generation, how much longer must I be with you?
Yeah.
Who's he talking about? Is he talking about the crowd? Is he talking about the person who's addressing him, who wants his son cured? Is he talking about the disciples? I'm guessing he's talking about the disciples, but that sounds pretty harsh to be talking to them that way. So that's my puzzle.
It's a good puzzle. What do y'all think?
Well, just sort of on the human level, Jesus has just had the second report card from his father, I guess, that you're on the right track. This is what you've got, what you're going to have to do. And he's just as a human being, he's saying, oh dear, this is not going to be comfortable. And so he's this is the cranky Jesus that I run into every so often, that who endears himself to me because of, yes, okay, yes, he was.
Aren't you glad he gets cranky?
Yes,
I am too.
but then he buckles down and solves it and explains why he needed to solve it. But it's another lesson for the kids, for the disciples.
The kids, they're
And he says, he says to them, because they don't have any faith. And then he says, but if you have faith as a grain of mustard seed, and I'm thinking that's something as a tiny, tiny bit. I mean, they're pretty damn low on the totem pole if they can't meet that standard, and they've been with him,
it's
Jeez.
harsh. I
Man,
totally agree.
You haven't learned a thing yet, have you?
where's the encouragement here?
It's not blaming the victim because the disciples aren't the victim.
He's
It's blaming them for not, doing something that is pretty clearly only he could do.
well, just to go, but I started to say in response to what Chuck said was, here they've been with him for the better part of 17 chapters, right? Realizing that's an artificial distinction, but never, a long time. And so Chuck's question is well considered. What does he want? And so what does he want, do you suppose?
Well, I find it interesting that the disciples are traveling with him and they get to see all of these miracles. So they must have faith in him. Maybe they don't have faith in themselves, that they can perform, at the same level. Regarding the mustard seed, I think it's interesting because I think that there's been some analogy in the past with mustard seed is like really easy to cultivate. So it spreads. There's this conversation of like, if you have a little bit of faith, it will like spread, it will grow. Not necessarily the size of the seed, but the result of the seed. But I don't know. I don't know why they would know that they're magical too.
Well, I'm just going to caution us about the word magical because
Okay.
Mark, you were going to say something.
It's just that the mustard seed recalls in my mind the parable of the mustard seed and the kingdom of heaven
that we just heard on Sunday.
We just heard it on Sunday, so it has a resonance right away.
And I think I've said this to this group before. Hey, Jackie, good morning.
Good morning.
That if you ever want to get Vince Leonard going, just say the word bamboo to him, because he is a one-man, he's on a one-man campaign against bamboo. And I kind of think about, when Kim was talking about the mustard seed, I kind of think of it like that, and we all know you cut down bamboo and boom, it's back again. And and so, there's something very positive that we heard in the parable this past Sunday about the mustard seed and how it takes so little for it to grow. Going back to what Ellie said about cranky Jesus, and by the way, Ellie, I think that would be a great book title. So I think that you and Bob could work on that. Cranky Jesus. I'd be more than happy to work on that with you. That could be a fun book. Let's do it.
Cranky Jesus.
Cranky Jesus. Why would Jesus be cranky at this point in the narrative?
Who wouldn't be?
Well, he's seeing the time run out. He doesn't have a lot. He's recognizing that he doesn't have that much longer to teach these people to cast out epilepsy and all these major things that he needs them to do to continue his work.
And again, if we think about the arc of these stories beginning. I keep going back to Caesarea Philippi, but that's really a turning point in Matthew's gospel, where he takes them up there and he says, who do people say that the Son of Man is? And they yada yada. Some say Elijah, some say John the Baptist, blah blah. But who do you say that I am? And Peter gets it. Jesus says, go to the head of the class, here are the keys to the kingdom. And then he tells about the rest of the story, and they can't hear it. And so he's done that. Then we have this literal mountaintop moment with the transfiguration, ta-da, this is who I am, pay attention to that. And then, then they come down and the disciples are still in the same place. This poor man whose son is ill. The man had faith in the disciples, right? I brought my son to the disciples and they couldn't do it. And so Jesus gets cross with them, like, oh my gosh, how is it that you couldn't do it? And you hear this, bring him here to me. It's like, do I have to do everything myself? I'm with you, Ellie. I love the cranky Jesus because it just reminds me that, yeah. And it makes me feel better in my own weakness. But then we have this, if you had any faith, you could do this. But to Chuck's point, they do have faith. They've been with him. They've been, they've hung on. They have given up a lot for this mission. So it's a really kind of cranky, hyperbolic, I would say, response. And I can get it, kind of, because time is running out. He is telling them what he needs to tell them, what they need to understand, and they're not getting it. And I can almost see him saying, come on, people, I'm here now. I won't be with you very much longer. And so, as Fred read for us, then they went to Galilee, and he says it again. The Son of Man is going to be betrayed into human hands. This is not the first time he's told them this. And they were greatly distressed. It's like, okay, in education, we were taught that students need 10 to 10,000 repetitions for a piece of information to sink in. That's a broad window, right? Somewhere between 10 and 10,000. I think the disciples are veering more toward the 10,000. And if Jesus keeps telling them over and over again, and it's not sinking in.
That's kind of incredible. I mean, how does he know this? And no, I don't want that to happen because this is good. You're wonderful. You're the Son of God. How can you possibly be killed if you're the Son of God?
Exactly. It just doesn't compute, right?
I mean, I'm going to go back to my theme of maybe this is a little bit about Jesus. Because it seems to me that this repetition of telling the disciples that he's going to be betrayed and killed, I think it shows that this is on Jesus's mind. He's focused on this. It's haunting him. He sees what's coming, and the human part of him says, "I don't like that. I'm frightened. I'm afraid." And as humans are, when you're frightened or afraid about something, you get short-tempered with all the people around you. And that might be one reason why he's so cranky, why he just says to the disciples, yeah, I'll do it myself.
And especially since they don't seem to be accepting what he has had to accept. So they say, no, you're all right. No, this is going to happen.
They're minimizing, at the very least, what he's telling them.
This from the gospel parallels the last line where they were greatly distressed. In both Mark and in Luke, it's a little different. They didn't understand and they were afraid to ask. So it's much more consistent with Patty. He tells them and they still don't get it. They just don't understand.
That's good.
Let's look to see what the Greek is here. Lupeo, sorrowful, grieving, offended, uneasy, sad. these are, how I hate these things. It's interesting that offended is part of that, which makes sense to me, because sometimes news is just it is so difficult to understand that it offends our sensibilities. It offends everything that we take to be true. And so they are deeply grieved, they're sorrowful, which is a different take than just not understanding. Thank you so much for reading that, John. So they are greatly distressed, they're grieving. And maybe they have been hearing it and they just can't take it in.
They're in denial.
They're in denial, which, as we know, is very much a part of grief. This is sort of preemptive grief, right? Grief before the fact. He hasn't left them yet, and they're feeling it. And so there's something to this repetition, which may in fact be necessary. And, when you were talking, Mark, about Jesus's fear, I was connecting the dots to what we were looking at last week a little bit with that Edward Nipper's depiction of the Transfiguration, and then his artist statement afterwards, when he was saying that, for Christians, Jesus can't be disembodied, right? The embodiment, the humanity is essential to the faith. That is what Christianity is about. And I connect that very much to what you were saying, Mark, about that humanity, right? That of course Jesus is afraid. And what good news is there for us in that he knows what it is to be terrified, right? That for me, that's the gift of the incarnation, that we have a God who gets it. And here, we hear Jesus working this out. Anything else? What do you think about the faith the size of a mustard seed and moving the mountain? All of that. That's probably a familiar saying that you've heard before.
They can tell me that truly, but in all the 2,000 years of history since that time, there have not been a lot of people who can tell the mountain to move.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not necessarily, I mean, he uses the mustard seed metaphor several times, and just no, I mean, my faith actually is the size of a mustard seed. Compared to yours, certainly. I can't move mountains, so that's what's missing from my is I have faith, but I don't have faith that I can move a mountain. That's a bigger faith, and he's asking a lot there.
He is asking a lot. That's right. He absolutely is asking a lot. Is it a realistic ask? Is it a reasonable ask?
Not as far as history would seem to say.
You can't accuse Jesus of being unreasonable. That's just not in the rules. However,
we can say he's cranky.
that's because we empathize with the crankiness, but
we sure do.
I mean, over the millennia, there have been people who have had faith that can move mountains. Historically, there have been people who can do that, but the count them on the toes of your one hand. Like it's very rare, and
This is one of those instances where Jesus seems to be saying, you know, I'm not that special. Anybody can do the things that I'm doing if you have faith.
Yeah, if I'm the son of God, I can, but
Well, but he's saying you could do it too. You know, you can walk on the water. You can move mountains. You can cure demons. You know, there's nothing in that I'm doing that you people can't do just as well.
he has a lot more faith than us than we have in ourselves.
Ah, beautiful.
Well, and that again, I footnote in my parallels in Matthew in 21, which is going to be several chapters down. He repeats this concept about moving the mountain, throwing it into the sea, but he says, I tell you, if you have faith and never doubt, you will be able to do these things. And I guess we all think about, I can't move the mountain. I
Mhm.
doubt. So it is, I mean, that's what we have to overcome. And I don't know what that means, but we all doubt the mountain moving ability, and Jesus says if you doubt, if you can overcome that, you can do anything.
And therein lies that was really helpful, John. Therein lies the problem, right? How many of us can overcome doubt? I can't. Fred was talking about Jesus walking on the water a moment ago, and that's a perfect example, right? Is that Peter walking on the water, excuse me. Peter is out there. He's, says, if you call to me, Lord, Jesus calls to him. He's out there until he starts to pay attention to what he's doing. And then he sinks, right?
Like Wile E. Coyote looking forward.
I just got the visual. That was great.
Yeah.
I think we all can see that. And so, yeah. And then Ellie said, maybe Jesus has more faith in us than we have in ourselves, not to mention our faith in Jesus. These are great questions. Can we overcome our doubt, or is doubt hardwired into our humanity?
Well, certainly human experience is that, no, it's very difficult to move a mountain unless you've got a great big shovel. So just from learned experience, these things seem to be impossible.
Mm-hmm.
It may be that we go off on maybe the wrong tangent if we think about faith as being connected to these extra special powers and abilities that frankly none of us are going to have in our lifetime. I mean, the real message is that for us to do the regular everyday work of faith, taking care of the sick, and just being a good Christian in everyday life, that requires faith. That
It
requires,
certainly does.
and so because everybody gets discouraged, everybody gets upset, it's not working, you get cranky,
Too hard.
too hard, no, get discouraged, and so on, and so just everyday stuff is hard enough. And I think part of the message is don't give up, but you do need faith to keep yourself going. And I think it may be a tangent to sort of think through this in terms of extraordinary powers that we really don't possess.
There's the example of Mother Teresa's diaries where she lost
Mhm.
faith. And if she's losing faith,
Yeah.
Exactly.
you
That
know,
was when
I'm
that book came out, that was really eye-opening for me. I totally agree with you, Fred. Like, wow.
yeah, but I mean if she's losing faith, how am I gonna
Mhm.
do it? I have read about the experiences of monasteries, where the potential monks go through what they call a period of dryness.
Hmm.
where they just, the things that brought them to the monastery don't seem to satisfy,
Mm,
and they lose a fair number during that period. You have,
mhm.
I hate to say you have, they say you have to power through it, but you have to find your own faith in that. I don't know if anybody else is familiar with what I'm talking about.
Mhm.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Absolutely. And that's why the novitiate period is as long as it is, because that's, it's a time of testing. We could liken it potentially to Jesus in the wilderness going off and can we do this? Where are the resources? Where is the spiritual strength? And not everyone can. I certainly couldn't do that. So, these questions, so I do think Jesus is being a little hyperbolic, right? When he talks about moving a mountain. Okay. And is that Jesus? Is that Matthew, or the gospelers in general? Good question. I don't know. But I think that's it's meant to be for effect. And sometimes Jesus says things. And the next bit that we're going to read, it's just a weird little paragraph. And again, you hear Jesus doing things maybe for effect. But the point is, and I think what Mark was saying was so helpful about, just doing the daily tasks of the life of faith is hard enough without getting discouraged. And so what do we do then? What do we do? How do we maintain that faith? How do we find the faith? How do we rediscover the faith if it has waned?
Oh, we're getting back to the salt.
Say more?
Oh, that if the salt has lost its saltiness, what's going to make it salty?
Mm-hmm. How do we rediscover the saltiness or the faith in our humanity, where we have those days where like, I give up, I can't do this?
Believe that it's going to come back sometime. It's
Yeah.
kind of faith and faith in your lack of faith.
Maybe just open your heart to rediscover it.
So you've got to be willing and open to that.
Sometimes it's not up to you. I mean, it's not working. You're dry. You're discouraged. You don't really believe it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And just open yourself. Wait patiently. I mean, that's what grace is supposed to be all about. It's not all about you. Sometimes you have to just wait for the other part to show up and have faith that it will.
Okay, so Ellie's going to write the book Cranky Jesus, and Mark's going to write the book It's Not All About You. These are some great lines, guys. And I agree with all of that. I would add that it's a lot easier to do that, to have that patience and to try to be open when we're in community. And I see it in this group. I see it in our larger congregation. I see it in the Soul Sisters. I'm sure it's true in the men's group as well, that, we can't always, none of us on our own can always feel it, right? And we can hold each other up. We can help each other, walk with each other. Sometimes, I have to hold up, be the person of, to hold up the faith for someone who's really struggling. There have been times when people in the congregation have had to hold me up. During the pandemic, there were times when I was just like, oh man, I don't know. And if it weren't for the vestry saying, no, we're going to do this, I might have just said, this is too hard. And so I do think that the community of faith is essential to this, because I think it's really hard to do it on one's own. And some people maybe can, but I think by and large, most of us need to be walking with other folks. Well, let's do this weird little paragraph at the end. I got to say, I had forgotten this story, and I'm eager to hear what you make of it. Would someone like to read this last paragraph for us?
Okay.
Thanks, Zoe.
When they reached Capernaum, the collectors of the temple tax came to Peter and said, "Does your teacher not pay the temple tax?" He said, "Yes, he does." And when he came home, Jesus spoke of it first, asking, "What do you think, Simon? From whom do the kings of the earth take toll or tribute? From their children or from others?" And when Peter said, "From others," Jesus said to him, "Then the children are free. However, so we do not give offense to them, go to the sea and cast a hook. Take the first fish that comes up, and when you open its mouth, you will find a coin. Take that and give it to them for you and me."
Thank you.
Now, we're not supposed to use the term magical.
I was just going to say. I was just going to say. It's vindicated here. What's this paragraph about? What do you hear here?
I hear elements of give unto Caesar what is Caesar's and whose face is on the coin or not. There's some of that response if you pay taxes or not.
Yep.
My thing has got a footnote, Patty, and maybe you know, about to Exodus 30:13. Is this harken back to something that occurred?
And
in-
one sec. I think I have an idea about that, but let me see. Exodus 30:13. The Lord spoke to Moses, when you take a census of the Israelites to register them, at registration, all of them shall give a ransom for their lives to the Lord, so that no plague may come upon them for being registered. This is what each one who is registered shall give: half a shekel according to the shekel of the sanctuary. The shekel is 20 gerahs. Half a shekel is an offering to the Lord. Each one who is registered from 20 years old and upward shall give the Lord's offering. The rich shall not give more, and the poor shall not give less than the half shekel when you bring this offering to the Lord to make atonement for your lives. You shall take the atonement money from the Israelites and shall designate it for the service of the tent of meeting. Before the Lord, it will be a reminder to the Israelites of the ransom given for your lives. So that's the background of the temple tax, right? So 20 years old and over were to pay a temple tax. Interesting, the rich don't give more, the poor don't give less. Everyone gives half a shekel.
Very regressive tax structure.
Yeah, well, but look, I mean, this is interesting. He doesn't say we're not going to pay, but he says the money isn't coming from you and me. I'm going to go get the money from somewhere else. I'm going to spare my children, and then he does what can only be described as this magic, and it might just be accident. The fish swallowed somebody else's coin and was swimming around, and but still it does have aspects of magical thinking in it. And so I'm not sure what the message to us is. I mean, if the first part of it is disturbing enough, that because we're the children of God, we don't have to pay our taxes. But
I like that.
But the other
That's
part
what he's getting at.
even better. You'll somehow perform a magical trick and pay your taxes out of somebody else's pocket.
Pull a
I think-
quarter out of someone's ear. Go ahead, Kim. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I feel like what he's trying to get at is, we're all the children of God. Why would we pay? And he doesn't bring it quite full circle. I think he's just like, okay, fine, we'll go ahead and pay because that's what's expected, but it makes no sense because, children of kings don't pay. So why should we pay being the children of God? Or why should he pay? being
Mhm.
this, all of us, I guess. But
And yet he does, right? And yet
and he does. He follows the societal, and it's interesting that he follows man's law in this case and not what he thinks would be God's law.
well,
Yes,
and
the
that's,
earlier,
oh, go ahead.
I just going to say the earlier temple tax almost seems like, okay, you got to pay it in as homage to God or
Mhm.
whatever.
Mhm.
And so this is a much different take now. We are the children of God.
Mhm.
Right.
That doesn't compute. But hey, these are the old guys. Go find the fish, and
Mhm.
we'll do our duty.
Yep. And there's that tension that we were talking about at the beginning about being present to the old age and shining with the light of the new, right? Here's something, this is a perfect moment of rupture because the old system of temple tax doesn't make sense in Jesus's economy of the kingdom of God. And yet Jesus is clear, okay, we don't want to offend them, so let's do it. I just want to point out one thing, and there are these moments where Jesus, it's like, okay, he knows what you're thinking, because Peter is having this conversation in Capernaum. Remember, this is where Peter lives, with the tax collectors, the temple tax collectors, who are different. It's not the same thing as the Roman tax collectors, right? Who are accusing Jesus or questioning whether Jesus pays the temple tax. That conversation is happening, in the town square or something. And then he comes home and Jesus speaks of it first. Was Jesus part of that conversation? Maybe. The narrative doesn't say that. So it's like he knows, what do you think, Simon? And from whom do kings of the earth take toll or tribute? So he's playing, doing this riddle with them. So I just find that interesting. Well, I wanted to, hang on one sec, share with you this line from a commentary I was reading. Scripture scholar Ann Napsiger: the disciples were facing a conundrum. If they believed Jesus was the Son of God, why should he and they pay for the upkeep of their father's house? What Kim was just saying. Yet, if they didn't pay the temple tax, they would no longer be considered Jews, an identity they didn't intend to shed. And so here is this, catch 22, right? Because that's obviously essential to who they are. Matthew, throughout the gospel, is really underscoring the continuity of the gospel of Jesus, the good news of Jesus, with Torah, with tradition, with Jewish history. And so there's this interesting maneuver to kind of get around that. What do you make of that coin in the fish's mouth? That's a truly bizarre moment in the gospel. Had you all heard that before? Did you remember it?
No.
I had not focused on it. No.
I have to
Harry
say,
Potter, and it disturbed me very much.
can you say that again, Ellie? I'm sorry.
It was straight out of Harry Potter, and it really disconcerted me.
Well, you know what? And that's not far afield. I was in all the commentaries I was reading, scholars tend to agree that this is some sort of folklore or some magical, to use that word, Kim, story that was circulating. So he's drawing on something in the oral tradition. Now, some scholars question whether this was that saying was original to Jesus or not, or if it had been picked up in the oral tradition and then inserted when the gospel was written down. And they encourage us to focus more on that question about whether to pay the temple tax or not. What is the point that we might take away from all this? Forget the fish and the coin for a second. What do you think the point is that Jesus is making?
That we're children of God.
Yeah,
That's what I think the point is.
I think you're totally right. And so it's this moment of rupture that the separation of going in and paying your half shekel as a ransom for your life, as we heard in Exodus, that's no longer necessary. And yet Jesus wants to honor that tradition, and especially for the Jewish people for whom that identity is essential. He doesn't want to rupture that. So it's just one of those weird moments.
Yeah. On the other hand, I don't think he's saying we're exempt. I think he's saying, yeah, we're the transfigured community, but we're still part of the tradition, right? And we've got to play a little bit by their rules because that's our identity. That's who we are.
That's that intersection or juxtaposition or clash. I'm not sure which one to use, of the old age and the new age, right?
Yeah.
Exactly what you just said, Mark. Beautiful.
Well, that's what I wonder too. Like when Jesus talks about not necessarily the need to be circumcised or keeping kosher or all of these other things, I still think that he follows all the laws. Or whatever, as superfluous as he may think they are. It doesn't sound like he did a lot to actually rebuke any of the traditions as far as himself following them.
I think also he's reflecting the fact that you are a community of light, but you're still within the world, and there's no point in irritating the world around you if you don't have to. That's lame. That's lamer than I wanted it to sound.
But I think that was very helpful, Ellie. I like the way you began that with your community of light, and you're in the world. Right?
Well, I'm with you, Ellie, because I think like when people say like, there's God's law and man's law. Let's just take, for instance, drinking when you're under 21 or something like that. What would Jesus want? What would Jesus do? Would he want us to follow these rules because there are rules of society? But if Jesus is hanging out over France and he's hanging out over the US and there's two different ages, what does it mean, right? Like, what does it really mean to Jesus if one person, are these rules important to him? And I mean, I guess I grew up thinking they were, that we are supposed to be lawful citizens. And maybe this is an example of that. I don't know.
Yeah,
there's no point in being in putting yourself in intentional conflict with the community around you. If it doesn't, you can be your own community, but you don't have to piss off anybody else on principle.
Within limits, when you're in Rome, do as the Romans.
Exactly.
I had a boss that once said, just take the easy points, be on time, turn your time sheet in correctly.
Exactly.
Just take the easy point. This seems to me to be, let's take the easy points.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I wanted to end by, showing.
Is there a fish?
A fish with a coin.
The fish
Where's
the
coin?
coin.
Let me see that coin.
In the area of the Galilee, there are lots of different fish, but if you go into a restaurant, you will often be offered St. Peter's fish, which is probably the most common fish in the Galilee. And it's basically tilapia. And oftentimes it will be served with the coin in its mouth. I just thought,
that's cute.
and it's definitely connected to this bizarre little moment in the gospel. I thought that you would appreciate that. And when
Wonderful.
he ate St. Peter's fish, and yes, lo and behold, there was a coin in the mouth. And
you use that to tip.
To pay your temple tax, exactly. All right, so back to the question, if I can get back. Let's see. Are the disciples so far a transfigured community? Are they
Not yet.
not
They're
yet?
in process.
Yeah.
In
Well, isn't it
process.
a process? Yeah, like, isn't with, I would think with every miracle and everything that they learn more and more, that they go through that process, that they're further enlightened each time.
And I think as with any growth that we have as humans, it's a couple of steps forward and maybe a step back or sideways. And we see that, and hopefully they're going in the right direction. I hold this out because here they've had this experience of the transfiguration, and as someone said at the very beginning, as perfect, it's a lot to process, and they haven't had that time to process it, and they're living it and trying to figure out what the heck all of this means. And so we have these moments where they just, they say, well, what are you talking about? I say the same thing. What are you talking about? All right, dear ones. So we won't meet until the end of August, probably. And I'll check in with you. If you're able to do August 30th, that's great. I would love to resume then and then move into September. Or if people need to wait until September, whatever that date is, 6th, that's fine too. So we'll just kind of take it from there. All right.
Okay. Have a great vacation.
Enjoy.
Enjoy yourself.
Wonderful,
Wonderful
as
vacation.
always. Bye,
Bye,
friends.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye.